Today, we are going on a journey into a version of history and a faith that you've probably never seen before. We're heading high into the mountains of Africa to uncover the incredible story of a Bible that was kept safe, complete, and totally unaltered against all odds. I mean, just think about that for a second. While one part of the world was busy editing, curating, and sometimes just erasing parts of its own history, a kingdom halfway across the world was protecting the original version, sealing it away like a sacred time capsule. And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? What was inside that time capsule? Because we're not just talking about preserving a book. We're talking about preserving the ideas, the stories, and even the descriptions that just didn't make the final cut in the version of the story most of us grow up with. 88. This number is where our story really begins to unfold. Because in some versions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, there are up to 88 books. And if that number sounds a little high to you, well, you are absolutely right. Let's put that into perspective. The standard Protestant Bible, the one most of us in the West are familiar with, has 66 books. The Ethiopian canon can have over 20 additional texts. That is a massive amount of extra scripture, extra context. And here's the kicker. This isn't just filler content. We're talking about entire books that were actively, intentionally excluded from the Western canon. Books that the powers that be in Rome basically decided were too dangerous for people to read. You've got the Book of Enoch, which is actually quoted in the New Testament, but somehow didn't make it in, the Gospel of Mary, and so many others, all perfectly preserved in Ethiopia. Okay, so this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn, because this amazing act of preservation wasn't just about theology and ancient texts. It went deeper. It extended to the actual physical description of the most important figure in the faith. And it's a description that is worlds away from centuries of Western art. Think about it for a second. When you picture Jesus, what do you see? For most of us, for centuries, the image that comes to mind is what's been called the pale figure of Rome. It's a very specific and very European look. But the texts that were so carefully guarded in Ethiopia, they paint a starkly different picture. This isn't just some artist's interpretation. This is the description written right there in the texts they saved for thousands of years. So how on earth does that happen? How do you end up with two Bibles and two completely different images of the same Messiah? This question shifts us from the what to the why. And the answer, believe it or not, comes down to one single powerful idea. It all boils down to this concept of an unfiltered faith. So imagine a stream running pure and clean straight from a mountain spring. That's the idea here. A version of Christianity that grew and developed completely on its own, without being filtered through the political agenda or cultural biases of an outside empire. And this is the crucial historical fact that makes the whole thing possible. Ethiopia is unique. It was never conquered by the Roman Empire. That's it. That one fact is everything. Their historical independence meant their culture, their traditions, and their faith never had to answer to an emperor. They never got the imperial edit. And that fierce independence led to this unbelievable story of preservation. This was not a passive thing. We're talking about centuries of Ethiopian monks in these incredible churches carved right out of the rock, dedicating their lives to being guardians. They actively hid these ancient manuscripts, tucking them away in clay jars to keep what they called the fire of the original church from being extinguished. It was a conscious, heroic effort that lasted for generations. Look, rediscovering this history is absolutely about correcting the record, about understanding a more accurate physical image. But the argument here goes so much deeper than that. It's really about power. It's about who gets to tell the story and, more importantly, why. When you boil it down, you're left with two very different figures. On one hand, you have the image of a liberating Christ, a revolutionary figure who stands up to empires. But on the other hand, what some sources suggest happened is that this image was slowly replaced by a kind of Caesar's twin, a figure who was remade to look like the conquerors, an image that could be used to justify empires, not challenge them. And that leaves us with this final, really powerful question. It's the whole point of this explainer, really. It forces us to think about the real-world consequences of changing not just a few words in a book, but the very image of a faith's founder. What gets lost? What gets twisted? And why does that still matter so much today?